Welcome to Mo True Crime. I am finally back. I had an unexpected absence and I've really missed doing podcasts. This episode is not going to be on one particular case. It's going to actually have just a theme. And the theme is writers that have turned into murderers. I was inspired by an article I read probably about a month ago, maybe longer, maybe 2 months ago. The article was about Nancy Crampton Brophy. And you probably have heard about it if you follow true crime, but she was charged with killing her husband, shooting her husband, and she had previously written an article on how to kill your husband. So I thought, wow, are there other people that have done this? Because I knew of a couple in my head, and then I thought this would be a great episode with a theme instead of just a focus on one case. So we're going to cover a lot of people in this episode. We're going to start with Nancy. And it is just me on this episode. You might hear more episodes of just me. I might eventually have some people to interview, or I might have some people that sit in with me, but this episode is just me. So anyway, let's just get right into it with Nancy. This is so recent that all of my information is current. It did just happen, a couple of months ago. So she's 68 years old, charged with murder and unlawful use of a weapon. She shot her husband, Daniel, at the Oregon Culinary Institute where he worked. He had worked there since 2006. They had 2 dogs, PB and J. And by the way, her husband was 63 years old. He was found in his classroom by students on June 2nd. Nancy has pleaded not guilty. In 2011, she published a 700-word essay on a website called Jane Publish, and it was titled How to Murder Your Husband. So 7 years ago, she was probably thinking about this. On Daniel's bio, and I believe I found this on the website for the Culinary Institute, he was a marine biologist and a mushroom expert. He was beloved, from what I can tell, on the Facebook page for the Oregon Culinary Institute. They have done a couple of video tributes to him. It seemed like he's really missed and was a beloved teacher there. On Nancy's website, she's got her own little bio and the things that she wrote. She did have a blog, but it wasn't updated since 2015. Daniel and Nancy were married 27 years, and she announced his death on a Facebook post. And the Facebook post was, to me, a little strange. And you hear me shuffling papers because I actually printed it out, and I'll read it to you, but it is still out there if you are interested, if you want to see for yourself. There are a lot of well-wishers or sympathetic messages until obviously this got out into the media, and people have been saying nasty things as well. But when I printed this, there was just a few nasty comments. On June 3rd, which is the day after, she made this post. For my Facebook friends and family, I have sad news to relate. My husband and best friend, Chef Dan Brophy, was killed yesterday morning. For those of you who are close to me and feel this deserved a phone call, you are right. But I'm struggling to make sense of everything right now. There is a candlelight vigil at Oregon Culinary Institute tomorrow, Monday, June 4th at 7 p.m. While I appreciate all of your loving responses, I am overwhelmed. Please save phone calls for a few days until I can function. To me, it reads very cold and maybe disassociated, knowing now that she was the one that killed him. But if she wasn't the one that killed him, I would still think that that was cold. If someone, your husband, your wife, was murdered, I'm not sure Facebook was really the place right away. Maybe someone could do that on your behalf. I don't know. It's hard to judge in these situations, but to me it reads cold. Daniel was a beloved teacher, like I mentioned, and he loved teaching. He loved mushrooms, he loved his family, and he did what he wanted in life. The Institute held a candlelight vigil the night after he was shot, but I guess according to her, it was the next night. When students arrived that morning on June 2nd at 8:30, he was found alive, but he was unable to be revived. Daniel would deliver hot meals to the homeless. Everyone said he loved his wife. She called him Mr. Right, but they did have their ups and downs, more good times than bad. She wrote, that was her living. She wrote these novels. I think they were a series. They were called The Wrong Series. And they're, pulpy kind of books, shirtless, six-pack ab guy on the cover. Very cheesy to me, but, that's your thing. Daniel raised chickens and turkeys in their backyard. And like I said, Nancy wrote for a living. And I think at some point, I don't know if it's current, but she did at some point sell Medicare. In 2012, in an interview, Nancy said, "Murder, mayhem, and gore seem to come naturally to me, which means my husband has learned to sleep with one eye open." That's all I'm going to go into with Nancy because I think more is going to come out. She did plead not guilty, so there will probably be a trial unless they can do some kind of plea with her. So there's not a trial, but from the sounds of it, there's most likely going to be a trial. And so I think more will come out at that point. So I'm just going to kind of leave that there and maybe revisit it later. And we're going to move on to the person I thought of when I read Nancy's story. And this one goes back pretty far. I first knew of it in the 90s, I believe. And it's another writer, of course, because we're talking about writers. We are going to talk about Anne Perry. She's considered a mystery crime writer, and I first knew of her from the movie Heavenly Creatures, which is based on an incident that happened to her in her childhood. I saw the movie shortly after it came out. It's one of Kate Winslet's. I think that's when people kind of started to realize who Kate Winslet is. I mean, I think that was the movie that kind of got her noticed. And maybe it was just to me. I don't know if that's really true, but I know to me, I didn't really know of her until that movie. But let's talk about Anne. She was born on October 28th, 1938 as Juliet Marion Holm. She was born in Blackheath, London, in the United Kingdom. Her father was a physicist, so her mother was a homemaker and also a volunteer social worker. At age 6, Juliet became severely ill and the doctor thought she was going to die. She did recover, but by age 8, she became ill again with tuberculosis and she was sent to the Bahamas to live with a family that nursed her back to health. The family moved to a private island off the coast of New Zealand. At age 13, she rejoined her family, which had, at that point, they had also moved to New Zealand when her father took a position as rector of Canterbury University College. Juliet attended Christchurch Girls High School. She met Pauline Parker at school. They created an imaginary world and were inseparable. They both sat out in gym class, and when the girls were 15 in 1954, they bludgeoned Pauline's mother to death. Juliet's parents were divorcing, and Juliet was being sent to live in South Africa with a relative. The girls did not want to be separated. Juliet's father was going to allow Pauline to go with Juliet. However, Pauline's mother would not allow it. On June 22nd, 1954, the girls went on a walk in Victoria Park with Pauline's mother. On an isolated path, Juliet dropped a pink stone so that Pauline's mother would bend over to pick it up. Pauline hit her on the head with a half brick in a stocking. They had both thought one hit would kill her, but it took more than 20 blows. They both had participated in hitting her. The girls denied any involvement once Pauline's mother's body was found, but they cracked pretty quickly. They blamed each other. Pauline's diary had the plans of the murder. They both stood trial in Christchurch in 1954 and were found guilty on August 29th, 1954. They were too young to be considered for the death penalty under New Zealand law. They were sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. They were both released after 5 years, and they were jailed separately. The girls were not to have had contact since their trial. They were released separately as well, and Anne took the last name of Perry after her stepfather. They both changed their names. One of the conditions was that they would not have contact with each other. And when it means, when you have a sentence of detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, it means that at any time they can be put back in jail, from my understanding, or be put back into prison. And at this time in 1954, they didn't even really have a place for them because women didn't commit crimes and were not sentenced to life. So they were 15. So they weren't, grown adults and they weren't children. So they didn't really have a place for them. So I think the way they were treated was probably very different than normal prisoners. According to Anne's website, and it said she lived in, now this is according to her own website it's her bio of her own website, which obviously doesn't mention New Zealand really at all, the incident that happened there. It says she lived in Southern California for 5 years and went back to England when her stepfather was ill. Since her release, she worked various jobs to earn income: clerical, retail, fashion, air stewardess, ship and shore stewardess, limousine dispatcher, and insurance writer. She was writing all along with encouragement from her father, and this is about 1979. So I started from her bio and everything I knew, I started trying to piece together what she'd been doing. up until now because they kind of just disappeared. Both Juliet and Pauline, they both changed their names. No one knew what happened to them. So I'm just piecing together what I think, happened since they were released until now. So by her late 30s, she finally had her first book published. She has since gone on to write over 60 books. None of her books are out of print. Some have been bestsellers. She's sold over 25 million books, and her brother is her full-time researcher. The murder inspired the movie Heavenly Creatures, which I had mentioned. It came out in 1994. Kate Winslet played Juliet. No one knew the writer Anne Perry's past until the release of the movie, and that's when her identity was, made public. And in the movie, Pauline and Juliet's relationship was portrayed as sexual. However, in 2006, Perry had really not made any kind of public statements that I know of until 2006. And she stated that the relationship was obsessive and the two were never lesbians. Perry settled in a Scottish village and converted an old stone barn into a home. And you can see that, and you can see her daily life in a documentary called Anne Perry Interiors. It's just a glimpse into her daily life. In her 40s, she also became a Mormon. The movie Anne Perry Interiors, I saw quite a few years ago. It's really, I don't know when it came out, but it's not too terribly old. When I did see it the first time, I thought, how sad. I watched it again in preparation for this, and it kind of made me feel even more sad the second time. All she does is write in this house, and she has a staff of people that work for her. She has a neighbor that is, you just walk out she walks out her door, she goes down a lane, not even that far, and just crosses over into her friend's house. And I got the sense that everyone kind of felt sorry for her or pitied her, because at one point the friend said something to the effect of, once I know Anne is okay and good, I'll be able to get on with my life. It was kind of like everyone's life was on hold to cater to her and to make sure she's okay. And nobody could really talk to her about what had happened to her when she was younger. So it was all this kind of hush-hush thing. And I think they were all very curious, but it just wasn't something they spoke of. It just seemed like a very sad life. And I have since read that she sold the barn, the old barn that she converted, which was actually really pretty. She did sell it and she moved to LA. And I don't know if maybe she did that. She'd be closer to work, because I know she traveled a lot. The documentary doesn't really follow her traveling around. It kind of starts out with her at some kind of conference she was doing, but the rest of the documentary is mostly just her in her daily life, writing, bouncing ideas off of the people in her house that work for her, and editing, and it's just kind of sad to me. It's just, she's kind of lost in a world of just writing these books. But what happened to Pauline? Because it was actually kind of hard to find. She went into complete obscurity. After her release, she studied at Auckland University and graduated in 1964. For a year, she worked as a librarian and then moved to England and continued to work as a librarian. After Heavenly Creatures, again, this was in 1994 when basically both of them were made public, she was tracked down to Kent, England, and her name was Hilary Nathan. She was a devout Catholic teaching children how to ride horses. Pauline's sister said she lives a life of solitude. She's deeply religious and leads an unusual existence. She doesn't have a TV or a radio, and she's reclusive. Both Pauline and Juliet have been remorseful. Juliet has said she participated in the murder to prevent Pauline from killing herself. Both women became devout Christians, live solitary lives, live in rural villages, with the exception of possibly Anne moving to LA. But, for many, many years, for decades, Anne did live in a very rural Scottish village. And both choose not to marry, and both have a love for books, and both did not have children. The murder deeply disturbed conservative Christchurch. The arresting officer in the case later committed suicide. His daughter said the murder deeply upset him. What really got to him was not only that they were the same age as me, but they appeared to be two normal girls. So next we're going to move on to Christian Bala. So I read this article in the New Yorker called True Crime, a Postmodern Murder Mystery, about this writer named Christian Bala. His article later became a movie. Not something you hear about every day, article being turned into a movie. It's usually a book being turned into a movie, but this article actually inspired a movie. And it was originally called True Crimes. but later they changed it to Dark Crimes, and you can see it. I believe it might be on Netflix, and I know it's on Amazon. Actually stars Jim Carrey. Obviously, it's not a comedy. It's very dark. I had a really hard time watching it, and by dark, I mean the subject matter is dark and the film is literally dark. I had a really hard time seeing it. You might have to turn the brightness up. Really dark rooms, and I know that's the theme. They want to get it across that this is just a dark themed kind of thing. But I had a really hard time watching it for both of those reasons. A lot of sexual scenes, and not just, people having sex, but like in a torturous type way. The acting, there's another actor that I really, really like in this movie, but he always tends to have an accent that's not his own. He's from New Zealand, and he has this accent of maybe supposed to be Polish, but I think it's like this mixture of Russian, and I don't know what it is, but it kind of comes and goes. And same for Jim Carrey. I mean, I love Jim Carrey, but his accents kind of came and went, and that always annoys me, because if you're filming something that takes place in Poland, I think it should be in Polish. I don't think you should take a film that happened in a foreign language and then make it English with accents. That just, Polish people aren't over there speaking English at this time during this film. So that annoyed me, but if you want to see it, if you're that interested, it's called Dark Crimes. This article that it's based on explores the investigation of a Polish detective. And what he's investigating is, in December of 2000, 3 friends noticed a dead body floating in the water. It was the body of a nude man, later identified as Dariusz Janowski. I think I'm saying that right. He had been missing for a month. He was 35 years old, long hair, blue eyes, no criminal history, married, a businessman. He liked rock music, no debt, no enemies. Janowski had problems in his marriage 8 years prior, but the marriage was in a good place and they were planning to adopt a child. The police had no leads, no information, and basically gave up. So the detective came across the forgotten documents years later and became obsessed with the case. One of the things that stood out to him was Janowski received a strange phone call on the day he disappeared. His mom worked with him and he was away from his desk, so she answered the phone. She said the man was agitated, so she gave him her son's mobile number. When he returns, he sets up a meeting with the man and never returned after the meeting. The detective traces the calls. Janowski's wife had kept the receipt from his old cell phone, which allows him to trace the phone. The phone had been sold many times, even on a website like eBay called Allegro, by user Crispy, which eventually traced to being Christian Bala. Christian is a Polish intellectual. After his wife Stasia left him due to infidelity, he moved to the US. He spent time in Japan and South Korea. Christian had written a crime novel called Amok in 2003, which would have been 3 years after Janowski disappeared. It was a graphic, creepy, and pornographic book. In the book, the main character, Chris, kills his girlfriend. The character is filled with guilt and refers back to a crime he committed 10 years before of the murder of a man that disrespected him. In the book, Chris sells the murder weapon, a knife, online. There's an episode of the murder on a Polish TV show, which is similar to Unsolved Mysteries here. A phone number and a website is provided at the end of the episode. The majority of the traffic on the website, for the tips from that show are from the US, Japan, and Korea. In 2005, Bala returns to Poland. He's brought to the police station for questioning. The police let him go. But before he goes, they compare his passport stamps with the traffic that was on the website of the TV show. So when he was in the US, Japan, and Korea, that's when the site was visited. Then a friend of Stasia's remembers seeing Stasia talking to Janowski at a club called Crazy Horse. Stasia confirms her friend's story. Stasia spent all night talking to Janowski, and they end up going to a motel, but nothing happened because Stasia confessed that she was married, and she just had so much guilt she couldn't go through with it. And after that, she never saw him again, but Bala had hired a private investigator to follow his wife, and he began to harass Stasia about her encounter, threatening to go to his home and to hurt him, because I guess this private investigator saw her with Janowski. After Janowski is found, Stasia confronts Christian. He denies involvement, and she thinks he's incapable of such a thing, so she leaves it alone. She just forgets about it. The last line of Amok, which is the book that Christian wrote, is, "This was the one killed by blind jealousy." So Bala is found guilty. He's sentenced to 25 years. He maintains his innocence, and he is currently writing a sequel to Amok. And I looked up the book because obviously I wanted to read it, but it's only available in Polish. So there's not even a translation that was ever done in any other language. So I wasn't able to read it. There's a really great documentary about this whole case. I'm doing a really high level of it, but there's a lot more details. But basically, he got away with the murder, and what sunk him was he sold the victim's phone online. If he wouldn't have done that, I'm not sure they would have ever connected the dots. It's a good thing criminals are dumb. Next up, we have Blake Leibel. He was a graphic novelist from Canada. He was living in Los Angeles at the time of the murder of his girlfriend, Ayanna Cassian. Ayanna had just given birth to the couple's daughter only 3 weeks before her murder. Ayanna grew up in Ukraine and went to law school and worked as a prosecutor in tax crimes. She immigrated to the U.S. in 2014, and she became an actress and a model. Her mother came to help Ayanna after the baby was born, and Ayanna had told her that Blake had become upset after the baby was born. She asked her mother to babysit on the day of her murder. On May 23rd of 2016, Ayanna's mother had no idea it would be the last time she'd see her daughter alive. She became alarmed when she did not hear from her daughter. Her daughter was not answering her phone, and on May 25th, she contacted the police. The police went to her apartment she shared with Blake. Blake refused to open the door and insisted Ayanna was fine. Ayanna's mother insisted that they help her daughter, and the next day they forced their way in. Blake locked himself in the bedroom where Ayanna's naked and mutilated body laid. Investigators found red stains on a white headboard in the guest room, clumps of dark hair and a razor in the bathroom, and in a dumpster they found Ayanna's right ear. Ayanna was brutalized and tortured and was alive for 6 to 8 hours through it. There was evidence that Ayanna was drugged through the apartment, submerged in water in the bathtub, and she died of severe blood loss and head trauma. The autopsy report is quite difficult to read. Ayanna's entire scalp was traumatically absent and was not found, and was not present with the body. Her skull had been stripped down to the surface of the bone. There was no scalp present except for little bits in the back of the neck. Portions of the right side of her face were torn away, including the right ear and part of the posterior face on the right side, all the way down to the jawline. There were quite a number of bruises and abrasions on the face, primarily on the left side, the left cheek, and the left jaw area. A number of bruises and abrasions, including one which turned out to be a human bite mark. She had lived for at least 6 to 8 hours approximately after receiving the scalp injury and the bruise to the collarbone. I have never seen this before, which is the pathologist said he'd never seen this before and doubt that any forensic pathologist in this country or abroad have ever seen this outside of perhaps wartime, so it's extremely rare. In June of 2018, Blake was convicted of first-degree murder with the supplemental charges of torture and mayhem. He received life without the possibility of parole. I've purposely avoided Blake's background. You can look him up for yourself if you want to. What I do want to include was his graphic novel entitled Syndrome. The cover is of a baby doll with a partly removed scalp, and inside are depictions of bloodletting. Ayanna's body had nearly all the blood drained. Blake had been married. He deserted his wife for 2 weeks before she gave birth to their second child. He began dating 2 other women, one of them being Ayanna. He had also been charged with rape of an unidentified woman on May 20th. So his book is not in print. He's only a part of it. It's not his book exclusively. And I know there's been people that have been interviewed that worked on that book and said that he didn't have a great, it's not just him in the book. But the book is not in print. You can find it used for between $110 and like $235. If you read the reviews on Amazon, there are warnings to not purchase this book, to buy it used, so he doesn't get any kind of royalties. But Amazon doesn't even have it available, so if you really want to read it, it's going to be expensive and hard to find. I actually could care less to read it. Next up, we have Richard Klinkhammer. In 1991, Richard's wife disappeared. Hannah Laura Klinkhammer, known as Hanny, she was a pediatric nurse. She went missing from the marital home in the Netherlands, and Richard was always the prime suspect. The police questioned him at his home, and he denied killing her or knowing anything about her disappearance. They locked him up, searched the house, searched the gardens. Canines searched the garden. The police dug up the garden. A Royal Dutch Air Force F-16 flew over the garden with infrared scanners, and nothing was found. A year later, Richard took a manuscript to his publisher. It was a novel that is a Dutch saying that translates into Wednesday, Minstay. The novel was grisly, detailed exploration of 7 ways in which Richard could have killed his wife. One of them including disposing her body by pushing her flesh through a mincer and feeding it to the pigeons. His publisher had rejected the manuscript because it was too gruesome, but it began to surface in the Dutch underground press. Richard started to appear on Dutch TV. There was an interview with him on Birds of Paradise, a series about eccentrics, and in 1997, Richard moved to Amsterdam with a new girlfriend. He had become a minor cult figure among crime writers. When he moved, new people moved into his old house who wanted to make changes, which included removing an old shed in the garden. And while breaking the concrete floor of the shed, a skull was buried in a piece of clay a few meters below the surface. A skeleton was also uncovered. Dental records confirmed it was the remains of Hanny. And Richard, 62, was arrested in Amsterdam, and the next day he confessed. There are several videos on YouTube of Richard in Amsterdam. I think in Amsterdam. Maybe it's before he moved to Amsterdam, but they're videos of him being filmed, and he's kind of almost performing like it looked like he was outside of a cafe, and I think he was smoking and having a coffee, and he was kind of performing and was really enjoying the attention that he was getting. There's a lot of interviews with him. There's a few interviews that are quite old that you can watch. I believe they're subtitled, so you can get through them, but some of the ones that people just filmed, I have no idea what he was saying, but you can watch them if you really want to. But he was very happy for the attention, and now he's in prison. So our next writer is Liu Young Biao. He is the 2010 author of a book called The Guilty Secret. On November 29th, 1995, in a guest house in China, somewhere in China, 4 people were murdered. A lodger, an elderly couple that owned the guest house, and their grandson. The guest house did not keep information on the lodgers. So in 1995, there was no CCTV. They didn't keep information on the guests. So police were at a dead end pretty much from the start. However, DNA was collected, and 23 years later, that DNA would lead police to Liu Young Biao. Liu is an acclaimed author in China. In an interview, he said his novels were inspired by thoughts about the murders. He's admitted that the bloody scenes and gory details had haunted him throughout the years, and the feeling was worse than dying. Liu did not act alone. His partner in crime was, it was really hard to research this, so I couldn't find a first name, but his last name was Wang. Liu recalled that they used rope, clubs, and hammers. He also said the murders were so cruel that he would die 100 times for what he had done. Liu and Wang killed the lodger who shared a room with them because he looked wealthy. However, he said in the end they found a watch, a ring, cash on him, which equaled pretty much like €1. They killed the other 3 to cover up the murder of the lodger. So basically they were just going to rob him because it looked like he had money, and then they killed the other 3 just so in case they saw something, I guess. So police relaunched the investigation when they started using genetic technology, much like how they caught the Golden State Killer. DNA had been obtained from saliva on a cigarette butt found at the scene. Police were informed that the DNA matched the record of a clan with the surname Liu in Nanling, and after talking to people, they zeroed in on Liu Young Biao. Plainclothes police convinced Liu to provide his saliva for a DNA test, telling him that they were researching about the residents' family trees. And Liu had an idea that they were investigating the murder, but the images of the murder were still haunting him throughout the years, so he agreed to provide the sample. 2 days later, a lab test confirmed that Liu's DNA matched with the DNA traces found on the cigarette. Liu and Wang were both arrested and found guilty for robbery and homicide at first instance. They were both sentenced to death in July of 2018. So this is also a very recent case, and he does seem very remorseful, having written this book as maybe an outlet, a creative outlet to deal with, what had happened. But I'm always very skeptical of people that are, years and years later, for all of those years, if not decades, they did nothing. If you're remorseful, you turn yourself in. You don't let years and years and years go by. He is very dramatic if you watch any kind of court recordings of him in the courtroom. I mean, he's very dramatic, crying and weeping. Those are the main writers I wanted to cover. But I also thought of there's other writers out there, and not writers that wrote about their crimes, but that were just writers in general that had a murder. Either they were accused of a murder or they did commit a murder, but they didn't write about it. So I wanted to include a few more that are what I'm going to call noteworthy. I think the biggest one on this list, most of you are going to know, is Michael Peterson, who was a writer, obviously didn't write about the murder, but he was a writer that was convicted and found guilty of, and then later acquitted of murdering his second wife. So most of you do know him. If you've seen the docuseries, The Staircase, which I think originally was on Sundance, you know this case, and Netflix just did new episodes, new updates of it. I think it's still there. I'm not really sure, but I watched it right away. I had already seen the series, but I do periodically visit it because I am still on the fence if Michael did kill Kathleen. There's so many things pointing to him doing it, and the motive is there, the opportunity is there, the means, it's all there, but I just can't decide. I just can't decide if he's guilty or not. I know people want to say he killed the woman in Germany, but I really do think that was an accident. And then other people say, oh, well, that was his inspiration to kill Kathleen. And like I said, I think the thing with him is there's so much blood in The Staircase. And the thing that really gets to me is if you look at the crime scene photos, not only is there so much blood that's mostly dry, and granted, the pictures were probably not taken immediately after the police were there, but you'd think you'd see almost pools not dried in those pictures, and you don't. But the thing that really bothers me is that if you look at the bottom of Kathleen's feet, they're full of blood. So at some point she stood up in her own blood, and I don't understand how that happened, unless she was fighting back, which means Michael would have a lot more damage to his body if she was fighting back. But how did you get such a head wound with enough blood on the floor for you to stand up in it? That part of it is the part I always go back to and always makes no sense to me. So if you guys have a theory on that, I would love to hear it. I just want to know how that would be possible to have such a horrible wound from your head with so much blood that, she had to have been standing in a pool of blood for her. If you look at the picture, the entire bottom of both of her feet are full of blood. So how did that happen? I don't get it. I am really unsure if he's guilty or not. There's sometimes, especially when I revisited the docuseries with the new episodes on Netflix, I was like, yeah, he did it. And I remember thinking this the first time I saw it when it first came out. I thought, wow, what a pompous jerk. He's so arrogant. He's so confident. He holds his pipe and just those bushy eyebrows. Like, I don't know. There's just this arrogance to him that I hate him. And there is the motive of she goes to check the email that she's expecting to get for the conference call in the morning. She finds this pornography that he has. It makes complete sense that she had there's no doubt she had no clue. She had no clue that he was having emotional and physical affairs with men. She did not know that. I know that. There's no way. Not only did she not know, the defense was trying to say that, or Michael was trying to say that, not only did she know, she was okay with it. She understood. No. No, there's no way in a million years that one, she knew, and two, she was cool with it. There's no way. Okay, so she goes in to check for the email that she needs for the morning conference call. Michael's out smoking his pipe with his bushy eyebrows and drinking by the pool, or even in the living room or wherever in the house, outside the house. And she goes in to check the email. And you know what? He made that mistake of maybe he just didn't turn the computer off, or it was sleeping and she woke it up and he forgot to close something. It could have been that easy, He could have been looking at something before and got distracted and walked out and forgot about it. She goes in to check her email and she sees it. So what does she do? She confronts him. She confronts him with, dude, why are you looking at gay porn? And I'm sure she's probably either one, completely calm about it. Like, okay, there's an explanation for this, because she clearly was very successful in her own right. She was smart. So she could have easily been very calm about it. Like, please explain this to me. Or it was so shocking to her that she completely flipped out and was hysterical. And either way, I think the conversation led to possibly it getting aggressive, or she made threats like, that's it, we're done, we're getting a divorce, or whatever was said. And she may have left. She may have just like, I got to get away from you. I can't even look at you. And left, going up the stairs and either fell or, that's where we don't know. Michael knows what happened, but we don't know what happened. But I can see there being such a huge motive for him to get aggressive with her and maybe not even intending on killing her. And maybe he hurt her and then flipped out that he hurt her and thought, oh my God, I've got to get rid of her, or I'm never going to live through this, of hurting her or hitting her or whatever. Who knows? It just looks like he's more guilty than innocent. And, we can't forget the owl theory, which is very compelling. There were blood droplets outside. There were the feathers that were found, but owls don't attack. It's so rare. They do, but it's so incredibly rare. And I would think that the attack would have happened in the staircase, which means how did the bird get out? Okay, let's say this happened. It attacked her and she ran in the house and it had to have been like on her head and she's trying to get it off and she's flailing around. That it had to have happened in the staircase because that's where all the blood is if it continued to attack her. But where'd it go? You would see evidence of, because if a bird is attacking you, it's getting blood on its feet, it's getting blood on its feathers, it's flying. So there's going to be blood literally everywhere, splatter everywhere. I just don't see that, but only in the staircase. So I think the owl theory, it's just not plausible because I think Michael would have seen an owl flying around his house getting blood everywhere. And he never said that. And there's no evidence of that. It was just isolated to the staircase. And obviously Michael had blood on him. And this is always the thing too in these kind of murder cases that always make me suspect someone is you can tell from the photos. If you look at the photo of her, it's kind of from a distance and you can see her whole body. There are paper towels that you can see that the blood had tried, he had tried to clean up the blood with paper towels. And it looks like he was kind of pushing the blood towards her body and then just like pushing it with like a wad of paper towels and then just left the paper towels like pushed up against her. Like he was trying to keep the blood from like seeping, like almost like it was rolling downhill and he was trying to keep it from seeping, further and further and further into the kitchen area and onto the tiles. That's what it looked like to me. So anytime I see that someone cleans up, like someone is dying and you put cleaning up before trying to save their life, that's not right. She had to have been dead. And then he started to clean up. And then I think he realized there's so much blood. I cannot clean this up. Why else would you clean it up? I've not been in this situation. I hope I'm never in this situation. But if I walked into a situation of someone being very badly hurt, my last thought is to clean up. My first thought is, are they alive? Can they be revived? I'm calling 911. I'm doing everything I can. And then if they're dead, I'm going to get the hell out of there, especially if it's a loved one. Something did very similar happen to me with a death in my family. And this is just me. So it's my personality perhaps, but I wanted to get away. I didn't want to stay. And I kind of feel guilt about that, but I knew that the spirit and the soul was gone and it was just a body at that point, and it made me really uncomfortable. And I just wanted to get away. And obviously this was a natural death, so it is obviously a very different circumstance. But for me and my personality, I wanted to get away. I didn't want to stay there. And I can't imagine that you not only want to stay there, but then you're going to clean up. That's just weird to me. Anyway, if you guys have theories about it, I would love to hear it because I am so on the fence about him. I'm further leaning towards him being guilty than innocent, but I am really on the fence. I just want to say he has such a lovely family. His kids, his adopted kids, the support is awesome. And they all seem like such great people. I think they support him, but I just wonder if they question it as well. Did he do this? And I really firmly believe they don't think he's capable of it. They seem so sincere and love him so much. And so, yeah, I'm on the fence. Help me out, guys. I don't know what to think. But I'm not going to go into his whole story because most of you know it. I would just love to get, your opinion on it. But let's move on. So my other noteworthy is Richard Horne. And he goes by a pen name of Harry Horse. There's a video on the blog of Harry being interviewed, and he wrote children's books. So let's get into it. He was born on May 9th, 1960. He was an English author, illustrator, and political cartoonist. He was also the lead singer of the band Swamp Trash, which you can find some of their videos with him in them on YouTube. So Harry Horse wrote many books, and his books, like I said, they're kids' books, and he also included his dog in a lot of stuff, and he also illustrated. So he regularly appeared in the Sunday Herald, The Observer, and The Independent with his political cartoons. On January 10th of 2007, Harry and his wife, Mandy, were found lying together on the bed. Harry had stabbed Mandy over 30 times, having to get another knife as the first one broke off in her. He then stabbed himself, crisscrossing his arms and mutilating his genitals, and he had 47 wounds. They both died of blood loss, and before killing Mandy and himself, Harry killed Mandy's beloved dog and their cat. It was thought that the advancement of Mandy's MS had prompted a mercy killing. Mandy was only 39 and Harry was 46. The video that I'm going to post it's a video of Harry and his dog Rue, which he writes about Rue a lot. There's also photos. If you search Richard Horne or Harry Horse, there's photos of him and Mandy. He talked so highly of her, and I think she had gotten so sick and was not even able to communicate verbally anymore. And I don't think he did it to kill her, and it was nothing malicious. I think he really did think it was a mercy killing, that she said, I can't live like this. If I ever get like that, I don't want to live, or I don't know. But the whole thing is just so sad. I had not heard of this until I was researching all these writers. Wanted to include him. Another noteworthy, everyone probably knows him, is William S. Burroughs. He is a St. Louis native. He was born February 5th, 1914. And like I said, I should hope most of you know who he is. He was a primary figure of the Beat generation. He wrote 18 novels and novellas, 6 collections of short stories, 4 collections of essays, and 5 books have been published of his interviews and correspondence. Much of his work is semi-autobiographical from his experiences as a heroin addict. His work features frequent mystical, occult, and magical themes. In 1951, Burroughs shot and killed his second wife, Joan Vollmer, in what he said was a drunken attempt at a William Tell routine in Mexico City. If you've seen Naked Lunch, which is the 1991 film directed by David Cronenberg, it's based on Burroughs' novel of the same name. So his novel Naked Lunch, this film is based off of it. In the film, there is a scene where the main character, Bill Lee, plays the William Tell routine with his wife. She puts a glass on her head, like a glass that you drink out of. She puts it on her head, and Bill tries to shoot it. The next scene is the unbroken glass rolling into his foot, and his dead wife falls to the floor. Basically, that scene from Naked Lunch is what really happens to his real life Joan. In Naked Lunch, his wife's name is Joan. So his name is Bill Lee, and then his wife's name is Joan, which, by the way, I liked Naked Lunch when I first saw it. I have noticed a theme with Cronenberg's films, and I don't know if anyone else has, but I think he is obsessed with buttholes, and I'm not even trying to be funny, but in Naked Lunch, it's basically about these men that are exterminators. They start to realize that they can sniff the bug powder like a drug, and they start seeing these gigantic bugs, and the bodies open up and talk, and they look like talking buttholes. And it's not the only film of Cronenberg's that they look like buttholes. And I do think Burroughs explained it as that. I don't think Cronenberg was going out on his own doing this. But in the movie Crash, which is also a Cronenberg, and not the Crash that like everybody's seen, like the Crash that was before that Crash that is actually a good movie with Holly Hunter and James Spader, and it's about people that get turned on by car crashes. Cronenberg directed that as well, and Holly Hunter has this leg wound and she wears this brace. The wound looks like either a butthole or possibly a vagina. It looks definitely not like a wound. So anyway, it's just an observation about Cronenberg. There's other examples, but I'll spare you because I just always find really weird things about movies and directors and styles that they have. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. Maybe you guys know of some other examples of Cronenberg films, but... So Burroughs changed his story several times about what happened in Mexico City. And one of his stories was that he was showing his friends his pistol when it fell and hit a table and it fired at Joan. He was telling other people, they were doing the William Tell routine. Burroughs returned to the United States and was convicted of manslaughter in absentia and received a 2-year suspended sentence. Burroughs had one son with Joan. His name was Billy Burroughs Jr. Tragically died in 1981 at 34 years old. He had cut contact with his father years before, claiming his father poisoned his life. Billy had received a liver transplant, but it didn't stop his drinking, and he wasn't taking the transplant rejection drugs after the transplant, and his body was found on the side of a highway in Florida, which is quite sad. Burroughs was notified, that this happened. Burroughs ended up in Lawrence, Kansas in 1981. He lived there until his death on August 2nd, 1997 from complications of a heart attack. He's buried in a family plot in the Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis, which I have been to and have pictures of his grave. And Bellefontaine is where all of the famous people in St. Louis are buried. And it's so quiet. You don't even realize you're in the middle of North City because it is so quiet and it's so peaceful. And Bellefontaine and the cemetery next door to it is so worth a visit if you're ever in St. Louis. It is unlike any cemetery I've ever been to in my life. And it is just, there's a lot of famous people buried there as well. Anyway, let's move on. So our next noteworthy is James Tiptree Jr. He was an American sci-fi author. James Tiptree Jr. is a pen name, because obviously that doesn't sound like a real name, because it isn't. It was actually used by Alice B. Sheldon. She used the pen name from 1967 to her death. She was most notable for breaking down the barriers between writing perceived as an inherently male or female. It was not publicly known until 1977 that James Tiptree Jr. was a woman. So she wrote for 10 years without anyone knowing that, this was a female writing in the male voice. From 1974 to 1977, she also used the pen name Raccoona Sheldon. Sheldon continued to write throughout her life. Her last few years were unhappy. Very unhappy. Her husband was nearly a blind invalid, incapable of caring for himself, and Sheldon was also suffering from health issues. In 1976, when Sheldon was 60 years old, she wrote a friend about her desire to kill herself, but she knew her husband would not have anyone to care for him, and she couldn't bring herself to kill him. 11 years later, on May 19th, 1987, Sheldon shot her husband in his sleep, then called her attorney to say what she had done, then shot herself. They were found hand in hand at their Virginia home, and Sheldon had left a suicide note that was written years before. Every year, the James Tiptree Jr. Award is given out in her honor for a work of science fiction or fantasy that expands or explores our understanding of gender. Many of you might know who she is. I myself have not read anything she's written, books or stories, but after doing this, I think I might. So I'm going to keep that on my reading to-do list. So next noteworthy is Mary Ann Lamb. She was born on December 3rd, 1764. She was an English writer and a poet. Mary also worked as a seamstress while caring for her mother, her father, and her 2 brothers. Her brother Charles had a mental breakdown in 1795 and spent time in a private mental facility. On September 22nd, 1796, Mary's mother became angry at Mary for pushing her apprentice and started yelling and shouting at her. Mary had a mental break, grabbed a knife, and fatally stabbed her mother in the chest. Charles ran in, took the knife from Mary, and Mary was taken to a local mental facility. Charles took responsibility for her, and days later the coroner returned a verdict of lunacy. 6 months later, Charles brought Mary to live with him. Charles assumed responsibility for his sister, and they both decided to remain unmarried and live together for the rest of their lives. In 1801, Mary and Charles formed a literacy and social circle, including members Samuel Taylor, Coleridge, and William Wordsworth. Charles started drinking heavily. Mary would care for him. And in 1806, Charles and Mary wrote Tales from Shakespeare. In 1810, they wrote poems for children. The writing gave them financial security and into middle class. In 1833, Mary moved into a house for the mentally ill, and Charles soon followed. Charles died on December 27th, 1834. Mary was quite insane and unable to fully feel grief at this point, so she moved in with nurses and died on May 20th, 1847. Charles and Mary lived together for 40 years. It is such an old case that it was somewhat difficult to find, a lot of the story with them, but there were were a lot of indications from people that knew them that they were, in an incestuous relationship with each other. And that's why, neither of them would get married or move on or have relationships. But then they did have an adoptive daughter at some point that supposedly Charles was involved with, and Mary would get very jealous of her. And it just sounded really crazy all around. But they have some very famous books. Those books are still around today and very highly regarded. My last noteworthy is the famous French philosopher Louis Althusser, born October 16th, 1918. I'm getting an added video of an interview with him. There's very little video of him at all because of the time he was alive. And this video in particular is very interesting to me. Like I said, if you don't know him, if you don't know Louis Althusser, he was a French philosopher. He joined the Communist Party in Paris in 1948. So Althusser attempted to reconcile Marxism with structuralism and is generally regarded as the foremost advocate of modern structuralism and the main proponent of the idea that the mature Marx made a fundamental break with the romantic humanism of the young Marx. In 1980, Althusser suffered a mental break and, while giving his wife a neck massage, strangled her to death. He was not charged with any crime as he was diagnosed suffering from diminished responsibility. He was committed to the St. Anne's Psychiatric Hospital. He remained there until 1983. He became a recluse, working on his autobiography, and he died of a heart attack in 1990. He actually explains the murder in quite a bit of detail that I'm going to read in his autobiography. So this is a section of it, and the book is called The Future Lasts a Long Time. So, kneeling beside her, poised over her body, I am massaging her neck. I have often massaged her in silence, the nape of her neck, the small of her back. I learned the technique from a fellow prisoner of war, little clerk, a professional footballer, an expert in everything. But this time, it's the front of her neck that I'm massaging. I place my two thumbs on the hollow of flesh, round the top of the breastbone, and applying pressure, one thumb to the right, the other aslant to the left, I slowly reach the harder zone between the ears. I massage in a V. I feel a great muscular fatigue in my forearms. They ache whenever I give a massage. Helene's features are serene and motionless, her open eyes gazing up at the ceiling. And suddenly, I'm terror-stricken. Her eyes have glazed over, as if forever, and a tiny portion of her tongue is visible, strange and calm, between her lips and teeth. I've seen dead people before, to be sure, but never in my life have I seen the face of a strangled woman. I nevertheless know she's been strangled, but how? I stand up and I cry out, I've strangled Helene. All right, Althusser. And he is the last one in this themed episode of writers turned murderers. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to have other themed episodes like this. If you liked it, if you hated it, let me know. If you have any cases that you would like me to cover and research, let me know. Otherwise, I will catch you guys in the next episode. Be good. And if you can't be good, be careful.